Hey friend, in today's watercolor tutorial, I'm going to be teaching how to paint this landscape of Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. Without further ado, let's get painting. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be using Prussian Blue, Cobalt Turquoise, Aqua Green, Payne's Gray, Sap Green, and VanDyke Brown by Winsor Newton. I'm also going to be using a little bit of white gouache as well for some highlights. I'm also going to be using Winsor Newton's art masking fluid as well. To rub off any masking fluid, I also use a rubber eraser, so I keep that on hand. And then for my brushes, I'm going to be using a size 16, a size 8, and a size 2 round Princeton brush. And then to apply the masking fluid, I'm using a brush that I don't mind using with the masking fluid and then tossing, because the masking fluid can really dry up your bristles together. So just using one on hand that you don't mind tossing is the way to go for that. And then the painting I'm working with today is a size 5 by 7 inches. I'm first going to open up my masking fluid, whoa, and use my kind of more craft grade brush here. And I want to start marking off some highlights. I'm going to start with about 2 inches down from the top, marking off just a few dabs in a irregular kind of format with some kind of rough edges. And that's going to be some of our glacial kind of snowbank areas on the mountain. Once I have this blob here, I'm going to then do kind of almost like a V shape, like a chunky V letter shape off towards the left of that. Off towards the right, I'm going to do kind of a diagonal line and then just whiten it as it gets closer towards the edge of the green tape here. And then off towards the left of the V letter shape, I'm just going to do one more just kind of blot of the masking fluid. Again, just kind of some irregular shapes are totally fine. And then from the base of the first area that we applied, right around this area, I'm going to do a swooping diagonal line, almost like a subtle rainbow curve. And then from the left part of this diagonal line, I'm going to do another diagonal line that's going towards the opposite direction, towards the right. This is going to be our glacier that's going into the sea. And towards the base, it's much more chunky. Alrighty, now I want to add just a few little horizontal kind of chunky mounds. This is going to be in this area right here where our lake, or sorry, the sea is going to be. And I'm just doing a few blobs of the white because we have some glacial ice that's kind of breaking off of this main glacier. So I just want to be sure and add a few white dots using the masking fluid for some tinier glaciers. And then I'm making sure to do a couple larger ones as well. So some of them, like this one here, I'm letting it be cut off at the edge. And towards the base of this glacier, the dots I'm applying are going to be much smaller because those glaciers, those like little baby broken off glaciers, are farther away from us, so they will be smaller to the eye. And then just a few horizontal lines, like dashes for some skinnier melted glaciers. Now, this area here is going to have like a tree log and some wildflowers and greenery, which is going to be very pretty. But to mark off the greenery and the flowers, I'm simply just going to take my brush and do a few dash marks with some of the white paper popping in between. This is just so that way when we paint our water and the green log that the greenery is going to be resting on, that's just so that that color doesn't take over the area and we're not able to paint any sort of floral or green element. So again, just tapping with my brush, very loose texture, doesn't have to be like exactly the shape of a flower or anything. This area is just going to be super loose and simple. And as it's towards the left side of this page, I'm thickening up the shrubbery a little bit more on this left side area. And then it just kind of dwindles off towards the right and slopes downward towards the right bottom corner. So once you have this area laid out, we could go ahead and let our masking fluid dry. I like to allow mine to dry for at least 30 minutes. If this was, say you're painting this tutorial in the winter time, I would give it 45 minutes or so. And once it's dry, it'll still feel a little bit tacky to the touch, but it won't be wet, and it'll rub off easily with the rubber eraser, but we won't rub anything off until after we've painted. But it'll still be a little bit tacky, but just not wet. So we're gonna give it at least 30 minutes and come back and we will be painting next. Okay, now that our washing fluid here, masking fluid is dry, I'm just gonna dip my size 16 brush in some water and just do a water wash just above where our mountain is gonna be placed. So just in those first couple inches or inch and a half. And I'm just gonna take a small amount of Prussian Blue, and starting from the top, I'm just gonna do a really light coating and wash of it. I just want a nice like pale dusty blue sky. And I may just add a tad bit more. It's always good to start a little bit lighter, and you can always build and darken an area. Okay, so while the sky is setting and drying, I now want to just lightly sketch using the color that's remaining on my brush, just a little bit of a water line here. And the water line is just going to be slightly above where the base of the glacier meets the water. So I'm just making sure to kind of lightly sketch that. Okay, so from here, I just want to do another water wash, and the colors we'll be using for the water are going to be a combination of these blues, the top four colors: Prussian Blue, Cobalt Turquoise Light, Aqua Green, and Payne's Gray. So I'm just doing a nice good coat of water, and I want the water to meet where we have the greenery that we used, that we applied the outline for using the masking fluid. Okay, now I'm gonna switch gears to my size 8 brush, and I like to start with the lighter colors first when I'm building up any kind of water or lake. And I would say starting from the middle and working our way towards the edge and a little bit towards the left, I have this funnel of the turquoise. So again, I'm going to start kind of in the middle, work my way outward. And then I just want to bring a little bit more. From here, I'm just going to apply just a touch of it down below near the reflection of the base of our glacier. So just a touch of the cobalt turquoise there as well. From here, I'm going to switch gears and switch my brush into some aqua green. That's our next kind of color we'll be working with. And I want to apply some aqua green on either side of the border of that funnel. And while the Cobalt Turquoise is still wet, I'm just gonna apply just a couple dashes of this aqua green in there. Not a bunch, but just a couple, just loose dashes of that. Now carrying on, I am going to take my brush and mix it into some Prussian Blue. And I want to apply some Prussian Blue, slightly overlapping a little bit on the aqua green, and then carrying over towards the base of this waterline. Keeping in mind, I'm leaving just a little bit of this area slightly blank with just the remaining Cobalt Turquoise, because again, that's our highlight reflection of the glacier. And then here, I'm gonna add some Prussian Blue in this area, slightly overlapping on the aqua green, and then going all the way to the edge of the left side of the glacier here and swooping downward. And then if I need to buff out any transitions and smooth them out, I'm just taking a damp brush and just smoothing out these areas a bit. From here, I'm just gonna apply a touch of some dashes of Prussian Blue in a few areas, and they will just subtly bleed out a little bit, but just a few touches. Next, I actually want to bring this area inward slightly using Prussian Blue. Because we're going to have kind of a reverse reflection going on, and this area is reflecting part of the mountain. Okay, last but not least, I would like to grab a touch of our Payne's Gray. And I just switched my brush in straight black, so I'm gonna switch gears to Payne's Gray, not black, and I'm just gonna do a few overlapping touches of our Payne's Gray here because I just want to slightly tone down the blue, and this is gonna be our deepest shadow color reflecting some of our mountains. So I'm just going over the more dense blue areas with a touch more of that Payne's Gray, just to get a really beautiful contrast and shadow effect. All right, I am now gonna just let our water set. And while this area here, divided by the masking fluid where our greenery will be, while this area is drying, I wanna add some of our VanDyke Brown to paint kind of a wood log that's in view. So I'm just taking my brush, my size 8 brush, and just doing a wash of this brown. Being mindful not to go too far to where the brown may bleed into the water, but just getting a nice foundational wash. While that's still wet, I'm gonna get some more VanDyke Brown and just apply a few areas where it's a little bit more bold in color. And then I'm gonna take a touch of Payne's Gray and apply just a few areas of Payne's Gray just to tone down the warmness of the log. And then while it's still wet, I'm just gonna dry off my size 8 brush and lift some of the pigment for kind of a stripe detail. And I'm just drying my brush in between each lifting stroke. All right, and I'm just gonna let our wet areas here finish drying, and when we come back, we will add some more details to our mountain above. Next up, using our size 6 brush, I want to add a bit more detail to our mountain range. And starting on this left side, I'm just gonna take some VanDyke Brown and just do a nice wash and kind of angle this kind of mountainside here to slope downward and meet all the way to the edge of the glacier, which we still have marked off with some of our masking fluid. And next up, I am going to take a little bit of our Payne's Gray, and I just want to do a few streaks of Payne's Gray, keeping this really loose, but just to show some depth and detail into the mountain and giving it some structure. All right, next I want to take just a touch of Sap Green, and I am just going to overlap just a couple little areas with some Sap Green, just tapping with my brush, just like so. And I kind of want to do a similar thing on the right side, except I'm going to do a bit more of our Payne's Gray to start. This is going to be a cooler tone side of the mountain here. We'll incorporate just a little bit of the VanDyke Brown as well. And I'm putting this mountain all up against this swooping line here that we did previously with the masking fluid. All right, next I'm going to take a little bit of the VanDyke Brown and just do a few areas just to incorporate some of that earthiness from the VanDyke Brown. Then I want to incorporate just a few more deeply saturated touches of our Payne's Gray. So I'm going in this right corner here. I'm going to do a little bit more in the bottom area where the water meets the mountain, and some in this kind of crevice area, this little triangle kind of formation. All right, now we're gonna start to add some more details to our mountains. So using mostly Payne's Gray, we'll also add a few touches of the other lighter colors once we erase the masking fluid. But from here, I'm just going to tap my brush with the Payne's Gray and just do a few irregular brush marks. Next, I want to do a few more just kind of jagged, loose brush marks in a horizontal line, and then swoop it upward just above where we have this washi tape. All right, next I want to paint our mountain top. So to get just a loose sketch of this, I'm gonna just start with a really simple kind of triangular point, just kind of as our reference point. Then from here, I want to paint some of this navy and bring it slightly down. And then I'm just gonna blot it out a little bit, just give some irregular texture to the mountain. Next, I'm gonna do the same thing where I'm just blotting it slightly, just below that triangle form. And then off towards the right, I'm gonna just lightly tap below just to give a little bit of texture in the mountain. Then I'm gonna do just a slight vertical line, just like so, with a lot of jagged edges. By the way, mountains are not very easy, personally, for me. So if you're struggling with this, please take your time and even pause the different steps or rewind. There's no rush in this part because it's not a lot of wet and wet technique, so you can definitely take your time and not feel rushed. Okay, so the next part that I'm gonna do is just do a kind of loose rounded triangle towards the right, and then a second one, and slope it down. And then I'm just gonna take a little bit of water just to buff out that line, just like so. And any dark areas that overpower the mountain, we can always utilize our white gouache later to kind of add in some more snow details. So don't worry if that kind of overpowered anything. Okay, next we have kind of a sloping, jagged edge that eventually goes down towards the mountain, the brown mountain towards the left. Next, I'm going to take a little bit of water, and using what Payne's gray is still wet, I am just going to buff out this line of the deep Payne's gray, add a couple areas of texture, and then as we get into this inner area, I'm simply just going to tap my brush just to get some irregular brushwork in here. And then I want to add just a couple darker parts of Payne's gray towards the left side of the point of this triangle in the center. I'm going to add a touch more Payne's gray over here as well. I'm just adding a few touches where the Payne's gray is more concentrated, so that way we get a little bit more depth and shading. Okay, so before we wash off any of our masking fluid, I just want to take my size 2 brush and add some more details to our log here, in addition to our darker mountain areas. So I'm going to take some VanDyke Brown and just do some dry brush strokes, just angling my brush to get that nice texture, using the belly side of my brush here and just swiping it. That way we get that beautiful texture. I'm going to take a little bit of Payne's gray to it also, just to add a little bit more darker wood texture here. Okay, I really like that texture on the log. And then next, I'm gonna add just a few areas in this mountain where I'm gonna do some angled brush strokes, kind of similar to the log situation, where I'm just angling the brush strokes towards the left corner. Again, I'm just using some VanDyke Brown. All right, and then I'm going to take some Payne's Gray and just do a few areas of concentrated Payne's Gray, especially towards the base. And as I get towards the base, I want to do some irregular, kind of jagged line work here, so that way where the mountain meets the water, it's not a perfectly straight line. So I start with that, and then I'm pulling from the Payne's Gray that I laid out at the base and just dragging it slightly upward. Okay, now I want to do kind of a similar thing towards the right here, except I'm mostly going to be doing Payne's Gray. So I'm going to start on the inside right here. And then from there, I'm just going to lift my brush slightly and angle it towards the right corner of the artwork. And here, I'm also going to do kind of a jagged line work towards where the water meets the base of the mountain. From there, I'm simply just going to drag upward using the side angle of my size 2 brush to get these really loose, rough, textured brush strokes. And then I'm going to add a little bit of Payne's Gray up here towards the top and drag that down a little bit as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let these areas dry, and when we come back, we will use our rubber eraser to take off all of our masking fluid. All right, before I use my eraser to rub off all of my masking fluid, I just wanted to point out I completely forgot we will be using some purple for just a few pops of purple in our wildflowers and greenery here. So I just wanted to note that change. All right, to get the masking fluid off, I simply am just going to rub off and peel the masking fluid in all the areas that we applied it, just like so. Most of the time it'll peel right off just like that. So I'll go ahead and do that to the rest of those areas. Using a size 6 brush, I am going to add some greenery towards kind of the base area of these white highlights here. And I'm gonna leave some of these white highlights blank to add some purple, just to imitate some florals as well. Okay, while that area is still wet, I'm just gonna take a hint, just a little bit of Payne's Gray, just to add a little bit more depth and shading to the bottom areas where our greenery is. Okay, so I'm gonna let that area dry before I add some purple. And now we can switch gears to our size 2 brush. And I wanna take a little bit of our Cobalt Turquoise Light, and I'm gonna just mix a touch of our Prussian Blue to it. Okay, and where our glaciers are, I just wanna add a touch of some of this Cobalt Turquoise Prussian Blue blend, and I'm using the belly of my brush just to get some irregular brushwork here. And I'm just gonna fill in these areas at the base slightly, and then just a little at the top, just to give some dimension to our little floating icebergs. I'm gonna do the same thing to this larger one here. Just to add some more depth. And I'll do some over here as well. And then for all of these kind of smaller ones, I'm going to just do a touch of that turquoise blend as well, mostly towards the bottom. Now I'm just adding just a little bit more, a few just flecks on the tops as well. Okay, so there is the details to our little floating icebergs. And next I want to add some more of that Cobalt Turquoise and Prussian Blue blend to add some more detail to some of the ice and glacial formations here. So I'm going to start with this base here of our glacier. I'm going to add and just tap some of this beautiful turquoise, and then I'm going to add just some really loose vertical motion brushwork at the base here. And then I'm going to do just a few angled lines, like some horizontal dashes as well. And then getting some water on my brush, I just want to buff out some of these edges and blend them slightly with the white above, just to help soften some of that brushwork. All right, next I'm going to take just a little bit of Prussian Blue just to add a few flecks of this deeper blue for some shading. All right, carrying on with our Cobalt Turquoise blend, I'm going to add a few streaks of it, just like so, just using the tip of my brush to do a few angled streaks pointed towards the left side of the page. Then from there, I'm going to take a wet brush and just buff out some of these streaks a little bit and just smooth them out with some water, allowing some of that bright white to pop through as well. All right, and then I'm going to just take a touch of Payne's Gray to add just a little bit of depth to some of these crevices, just like so. And then carrying on with our Cobalt Turquoise blend, I am just going to incorporate and just add a few touches of it in this left area, still allowing some of that white to pop through, so we're not going too crazy with the cobalt turquoise, but I'm just going through and adding a few just touches of it and keeping it very just loose and irregular. So here I just did a few like jagged horizontal brush strokes in here. Next, I'm going to do just a touch of the turquoise along this edge of this slope. I'm going to do a little bit along the bottom edge of this curve here. And then just a little bit up top. All right, from here, I'm just gonna take a little bit of Payne's Gray and just add a few flecks of Payne's Gray to incorporate with just a few touches of the Cobalt Turquoise that we just laid out. All right, next I want to take my watercolor, sorry, not my watercolor, my whitewash, and I'm going to incorporate just a few pops of white. I'm going to do a touch of whitewash towards the right of this triangle area. Next, I'm going to add just a few little brush strokes towards the left slightly. And then I'm gonna add just a few, just random, almost just dot-like highlights as well in some of these gray areas. Then I'm gonna add a few touches off towards the left. And then just a little bit towards this right area here. Just doing kind of a jagged motion with my brush. And then just a couple more flecks of the whitewash up towards the top. Okay. And lastly, I just want to do a little bit more of a broader highlight in this kind of glacial slope here, just tapping a little bit more whitewash, overlapping slightly. And do the same thing on this left side, just tapping a little bit of whitewash. Okay, so last but not least, I would like to add some purple in the remaining white areas here. And I'm just going to take a little bit of watered down purple and just gently tap in this white area. Keeping it really loose and simple. This purple is super vibrant, so I'm just kind of dragging it about. Do I'm gonna do just a few little points just to mimic some lupin kind of formation here. Okay, last but not least, I feel like our Payne's gray kind of just bled out into the green, our shaded green color. So I'm just gonna add a few flecks of Payne's gray overlapping and just tapping with my size 2 brush very loosely just to reintroduce that shading again, so that way it's not as bled out as it was before. And again, a little goes a long way. Okay, almost done, just kidding, sorry. Whenever I'm done, I always take a second look, or whenever I think I'm done, and I'll notice something that I want to add. So in this area here, I just want to add a little bit of jagged texture using my size 2 brush along that slope, just to make it look a little bit more realistic. And then I'm going to do the same thing over to the right, just adding a little bit of irregular rock texture, just like so. And then the last thing that I want to do is add just a touch more purple in just a couple areas of the flowers, just to add a little bit more shading and depth. Just using the tip of my brush here and adding just a few more flecks of a deeper purple. Okay, that is it. Thank you so much for joining me today for this watercolor tutorial of Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. If you enjoyed this tutorial, be sure to like or comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss any further watercolor tutorials.